Imagine standing at the altar, looking into the eyes of a man you believe you know completely. You have seen him struggle to make rent. You have watched him count change at the grocery store. You have held his hand through what you both called the hard years, and you believed every single second of it. You believed in him not because he had anything to offer the world in the way of money or status or power, but because he was yours. Simple, steady, real. You told your mother he was a good man. You told your friends he was the kind of person who showed up. You told yourself that the life you were building together, modest and quiet and unhurried, was exactly the kind of life worth living. And on the morning of your wedding, standing in a small church with folding chairs and a borrowed veil, you felt more certain about that than anything you had ever felt in your entire life. Now imagine that 10 years later, 10 years of shared meals and secondhand furniture and quiet Friday nights, watching television on a couch you bought at a garage sale because you could not afford a new one. You open a single envelope on a Tuesday morning while your husband is at work, and everything you thought you knew about the man sleeping in your bed every night dissolves right in front of your eyes like it was never real to begin with. Not the struggle, not the sacrifice, not the careful budgeting, or the skipped vacations, or the years of telling yourself that the better days were coming. Not even the love story you had been telling yourself and everyone around you for a decade. All of it rewritten in a single moment, by a single document sitting in your trembling hands at your own kitchen table. That is exactly what happened to one American woman. And by the time this story is over, you are going to question everything you think you know about trust, about love, and about the person who may be sitting closest to you right now. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary secret in the room is wearing the most ordinary face. And sometimes, the man with the worn-out shoes is the one who quietly, carefully, and deliberately owns the very ground you are both standing on. She thought she was marrying a nobody. A quiet man with worn-out shoes, a beat-up truck, and no last name worth knowing. She was wrong about all of it. And this is her story. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because stories like this one do not come around often, and you do not want to be the last one to hear them. Her name was Carol, and his name was Daniel. And if you had passed them on the street in the small Ohio town, where they first met in the autumn of 2003, you would not have looked twice. That is not a criticism. That is the whole point of this story. Carol was a middle school science teacher, the kind of woman who brought homemade banana bread to faculty meetings and stayed late after school to help the kids who were falling behind. She drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a crack in the dashboard and a passenger seat permanently occupied by a stack of ungraded papers. She was not looking for wealth. She was not looking for a grand romance lifted from the pages of a novel. She was looking for something steady, something real. She had grown up watching her parents fight about money, watching the electricity get cut off in November, watching her mother cry quietly at the kitchen table over bills she could not pay. Carol had decided early that she would rather have peace than luxury, and she meant it with everything she had. Daniel was working at a local hardware store when they met. He was 31 years old, quiet in a way that some people mistook for shyness, but was really something closer to deliberateness. He did not speak unless he had something worth saying. He did not spend money on things he did not need. He drove a Ford F-150 that had seen better decades, and he wore the same rotation of flannel shirts and works boots that he had been wearing since his mid-20s. He rented a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. He brought his lunch to work in a brown paper bag. He did not own a credit card. He did not go on vacations. He did not talk about himself very much at all, which Carol would later describe as one of the first things she found genuinely attractive about him in a world full of men who could not stop narrating their own greatness. They met on a Wednesday afternoon in October when Carol came into the hardware store to return a paint roller she had bought the week before and never used. Daniel was the one who processed the return. He was polite. He was patient. He did not rush her when she fumbled with her receipt. He smiled once, just once, and it was the kind of smile that did not ask anything of you in return. Carol left the store and sat in her car for a few extra minutes before starting the engine, and later, she would tell her closest friend that she could not entirely explain why. She just was not ready to leave yet. They ran into each other again 2 weeks later at a diner on Route 9, where Carol had gone alone on a Saturday morning, with a crossword puzzle and a cup of coffee. Daniel was in the corner booth, eating scrambled eggs, and reading a paperback novel with a cracked spine. She recognized him before he recognized her. She was the one who said hello. He was the one who offered her the seat across from him. And they sat in that diner for 3 hours and 45 minutes, talking about things that people usually take months to talk about. And by the time they walked out into the parking lot together, the sun had shifted, and the light had that particular golden quality it gets in Ohio in late October, when the leaves are coming down, and the air smells like something ending, and something else just beginning. They dated for 2 years before Daniel proposed, not with a lavish dinner or a ring that cost more than Carol's monthly salary. He proposed on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on the tailgate of his truck at a lake outside of town, where they had started going on weekends to drink coffee and watch the water. He did not get down on one knee. He turned to her, looked at her the way he always looked at her, like he was reading something important, and wanted to get every word right. And he said, "I want to keep doing this with you. All of it. Every ordinary day." Carol said yes before he had finished the sentence. The ring was a simple gold band with a small inset diamond that he had saved up for over the better part of a year. And Carol wore it like it was the most valuable thing she had ever been given, because to her, it was. They were married in June of 2005 in a small church outside of Dayton, with about 60 people in attendance. Carol's students made a card. Daniel's co-workers at the hardware store chipped in to buy them a kitchen appliance set from a discount catalog. The reception was at a local community hall with folding tables and catered barbecue, and a playlist Daniel had spent 3 weeks putting together on a used iPod. By every external measure, it was a modest wedding. By every internal measure, at least as far as Carol was concerned, it was exactly right. She was marrying a good man, a humble man, a man who had never once made her feel like she was not enough, which was more than she could say for anyone else she had ever loved. She was certain she knew who he was. She was absolutely, completely, and entirely certain. And she would remain certain for the next 10 years. Right up until the morning a FedEx envelope arrived at their front door, and the ground shifted permanently beneath her feet. What was in that envelope would not just change Carol's understanding of her marriage. It would change her understanding of everything she thought she knew about the city she lived in, the community around her, and the quiet, flannel-shirted man who had looked her in the eye on their wedding day and promised to love her honestly for the rest of his life. The question of whether he kept that promise is one this story will spend a long time answering, because the truth, as it turned out, was not simple. It was not clean, and it was not the kind of thing you could resolve in a single conversation at a kitchen table, no matter how long you sat there, or how many times you asked the same question. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you, really? In the years between their wedding and that Tuesday morning in February of 2015, Carol and Daniel had built what she would describe to anyone who asked as a good life. Not a flashy life, not a life that would make anyone jealous or inspire a magazine profile, but a good one in all the ways that actually matter when you are living inside it rather than looking at it from the outside. They had bought a house in 2008, a 3-bedroom colonial, on a tree-lined street in a quiet neighborhood on the western edge of Dayton. The house needed work when they bought it, and Daniel had done most of the repairs himself over the course of 2 years, coming home from the hardware store on weeknights and spending his evenings fixing the plumbing, replacing windows, refinishing the hardwood floors that had been buried under decades of ugly carpet. Carol had picked out the paint colors and the light fixtures and the curtains, and she had planted a garden in the backyard that she tended every summer, with the same patient attention she gave her students. They were not people who needed a lot. They had friends they trusted, a neighborhood they loved, routines that felt like anchors rather than constraints. On Sunday mornings, they made breakfast together. On Thursday evenings, they went to a local trivia night at a bar downtown where their team had never once finished in first place, but had a genuinely good time losing. In December, they drove 2 hours to Carol's parents' house for Christmas. And every year, Daniel fixed something that had broken since the year before. And her father shook his hand with the particular warmth of a man who respected another man's willingness to show up and be useful. It was, by Carol's account, a genuinely happy life, and that is not a small thing. That is actually the most important thing, and it matters to this story more than most people realize when they first hear it, because it means that what happened next was not the unraveling of something that had already been falling apart. It was the sudden fracturing of something Carol had every reason to believe was whole. The FedEx envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in February of 2015. Carol was home alone. Daniel had left for work at his usual time, 7:15 in the morning, in his usual truck, in his usual clothes, with his usual brown bag lunch sitting on the passenger seat. Carol had a professional development day from school and was still in her bathrobe when the delivery driver knocked. She signed for the envelope without thinking much about it. It was addressed to Daniel. That was not unusual. They received each other's mail all the time. She set it on the kitchen counter and made herself another cup of coffee and sat down at the table with the newspaper, the way she did every morning she had off from school. She was not going to open it. She wants to make that clear, and it matters that she says so, because what happened next was not the act of a suspicious wife going through her husband's things. It was an accident of proximity, and an accident of timing, and an accident of the particular way the morning light was coming through the kitchen window and landing directly on the return address printed in small black letters on the upper left corner of that envelope. Mercer Property Holdings, LLC. She did not recognize the name. She turned the envelope over in her hands and looked at it the way you look at something that does not quite fit the picture you have been looking at for years. Mercer was Daniel's last name, she knew that, but Holdings, LLC. She had been married to this man for 10 years, and the word Holdings had never once appeared in any sentence. Either of them had spoken in this house. She opened it. She would later say she almost did not. She would say she held it for a long moment and thought about setting it back down and waiting for Daniel to come home and handing it to him unopened the way a person does when they respect the boundaries of a shared life. But something held her, some instinct she could not name and did not entirely trust and could not ignore. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out a document that was 47 pages long. It was a quarterly financial summary, and it was addressed to Daniel Mercer, managing partner. The numbers on the first page alone were enough to make her grip the edge of the table. $340 million in managed real estate assets across the greater Dayton metropolitan area, 47 active accounts, 11 commercial properties, 22 residential developments, 4 mixed-use buildings in the downtown corridor, a parking structure on 5th Street that Carol drove past every single week on her way to the grocery store, a warehouse district on the south side that had been converted into loft apartments 3 years earlier, and that Carol had once pointed to from the car window and said to Daniel, "Those look beautiful. I wonder who built those." He had nodded and said nothing. She sat at that kitchen table for a very long time. She read every page. She read it the way you read something you are hoping will turn out to be a mistake, a misfiling, a document meant for someone else who happened to share your husband's name. But there was no mistake. The address on the summary was their address. The phone number listed under Daniel Mercer, managing partner, was Daniel's cell phone number. The email address was one she had never seen before. A professional address attached to a company she had never heard of, registered to a man she had been sleeping next to for 10 years and believed she knew better than anyone else in the world. She thought about calling him. She picked up her phone twice and put it back down both times. What would she even say? "Hey, I opened your mail. What exactly is Mercer Property Holdings?" She thought about calling her friend Linda, who had known Carol since college and was the kind of person you called when you needed someone to tell you that you were not losing your mind. She did not call Linda either. Instead, she sat in her bathrobe at her garage sale kitchen table in her carefully painted house on her tree-lined street, and she read the document a second time from the beginning. And the second time was worse than the first. Not because the numbers were bigger, though they were staggering. Not because the scope of what she was looking at was clearer, though it was. It was worse because the second time she started to notice the details. The dates, the timeline. Mercer Property Holdings, LLC had been incorporated in 1999. Daniel was 27 years old in 1999. They had not met until 2003. He had been running this company for 4 years before he ever walked into that hardware store. 4 years before he ever smiled at her across a returns counter. 4 years before he had sat across from her in a diner booth and talked to her for nearly 4 hours, like she was the most interesting person he had ever met. She thought about their first date, their second, the way he had been so careful with money, always, the way he had winced, genuinely winced, when the price of something was higher than expected, the way he had said, on more than one occasion, in that quiet, deliberate voice of his, "I think it is important to live within your means." She had respected that. She had loved that about him. She had told people that about him. "My husband is the most grounded person I have ever met. He does not care about money. He cares about what actually matters." She stared at the document in her hands, and she thought about what grounded actually meant, and whether it was possible that a word she had used as a compliment for 10 years had been, all along, the most precisely accurate and entirely misleading description of a human being she had ever encountered. Because Daniel was not indifferent to money. Daniel understood money in a way that almost no one she had ever met was capable of understanding. He had been building something for years, quietly and methodically and completely out of her sight, and he had done it so carefully and so completely that she had never once had a reason to look. She closed the document. She put it back in the envelope. She placed the envelope on the kitchen counter where she had found it. She got up, poured the rest of her coffee down the drain, went upstairs, took a shower, got dressed, and then came back downstairs and sat at the kitchen table again, because she did not know what else to do. She sat there for 6 hours. She did not eat lunch. She did not grade the papers she had brought home the day before. She did not call anyone. She just sat with it. The way you sit with something that is too large to hold and too real to put down, and she waited for her husband to come home. Daniel walked through the front door at 5:47 in the afternoon, the same time he walked through the door almost every day, wearing the same flannel shirt he had left in that morning and carrying his empty brown bag lunch under one arm. He said hello to Carol the way he always did, warm and unhurried. And he went to the refrigerator and got himself a glass of water, and then he turned around and saw her face and he stopped. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his glass of water, and he looked at her, and Carol looked at him, and neither of them said anything for what felt like a very long time. Then Carol reached across the table, picked up the envelope, and slid it toward him. He looked at it. He looked at her. He set down his glass of water with the particular care of a man who is bracing for something and does not want to make any sudden movements. Carol said 3 words. She said, "Who are you?" Not angry, not screaming. She said it. The way a person asks a question they are terrified of having answered. Quiet and direct and with the full weight of 10 years sitting behind it. Daniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and then he told her everything. What he told her that evening at the kitchen table was not a confession of wrongdoing. Exactly. Though Carol would wrestle with that distinction for a long time afterward, it was more like a revelation, a complete and total unveiling of a life that had been running parallel to the one she thought she was living, visible to almost no one, documented in filing cabinets in an office she had never known existed, managed by a small team of employees who referred to Daniel as Mr. Mercer and had never once heard him mention a wife. He told her about his father first. His father's name was Robert Mercer, and he had worked for 31 years at a machine parts factory outside of Cincinnati, the kind of factory that smelled like grease and metal shavings, and gave the men who worked there a particular kind of permanent tiredness that settled into their posture and never entirely left. Robert Mercer had made a decent wage, decent enough to keep the lights on and the refrigerator full and the family truck running, but never enough to build anything with, never enough to get ahead of, never enough to stop the particular low-grade anxiety that sat in the Mercer household like a piece of furniture nobody had chosen. But everyone had learned to work around. Daniel watched his father come home tired for 31 years. He watched him count overtime hours and argue with his mother about the water bill and tell his kids that college was important, even though he was not entirely sure he could pay for it. He watched him, at 62 years old, get laid off from that factory with 2 weeks' severance pay and a handshake from a manager who did not make eye contact. And he watched what that did to a man who had given 3 decades of his life to a single employer on the faith that loyalty was a currency that would eventually pay out. It did not pay out. And Daniel Mercer, who was 25 years old when his father was laid off and who had already been quietly reading everything he could find about real estate investment and property management and the particular mechanics of how wealth was built and sustained across generations, made a decision that he never wavered from for the rest of his adult life. He would never be his father, not out of shame, never out of shame. He loved his father with a depth and a tenderness that came through clearly, even in the way he described him 20 years later at a kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio. To the wife, who was only now hearing this story for the first time, he would never be his father, because he could not bear to watch the same thing happen to the people he loved. The fear of that, the absolute bone-deep terror of building a life on borrowed stability, and watching it get taken away by someone else's decision, was the engine behind everything Daniel Mercer had done since the age of 25. He started small, a vacant lot on the edge of Cincinnati that a bank was selling at a steep discount after a failed development deal. He paid $11,000 for it, money he had saved working 2 jobs through his early 20s, and he held it for 2 years and sold it for $26,000. He took that money and bought a condemned duplex in Dayton that no one else wanted and spent 8 months of weekends gutting and rebuilding it himself, learning as he went, making mistakes and correcting them with the same quiet, methodical patience that would later make Carol fall in love with him across a hardware store counter. He sold the duplex for $61,000, and then he did it again and again. He incorporated Mercer Property Holdings in 1999 when the business had grown large enough that running it as a sole proprietorship was no longer practical. And he hired a small team of people he trusted absolutely and instructed them from the beginning to keep the company's ownership structure as private as the law allowed. He did not want his name on buildings. He did not want to be known as a real estate developer. He did not want the thing he was building to become the thing people saw when they looked at him, because he had watched what happened to people whose net worth became their identity. And he did not want that. He wanted to be Daniel. He wanted to be the man with the brown bag lunch and the beat-up truck and the honest smile and the paperback novel. He wanted to be that man because that man was who he actually was. And the money was something he was doing, not something he was. And then he met Carol, and he fell in love with her in a way that surprised him, the way genuine things always surprise the people they happen to. He had dated before. He had been in relationships that had ended for the usual reasons, incompatibility, different directions. The ordinary friction of 2 people discovering over time that they wanted different things. But Carol was different in a way he found almost impossible to articulate, though he tried. Sitting across from her at that kitchen table, on the evening of the day everything changed. She was real in a way that mattered to him. She cared about the right things. She was not impressed by the things that usually impressed people. She had never once, in the 4 years they dated before marrying, made a comment about money that suggested she was measuring him by it. She loved him for the flannel shirt and the brown bag lunch and the beat-up truck, and that love was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given him, and he was terrified of losing it. He knew, rationally, that he should tell her. He knew that a secret of this magnitude was not something a marriage could comfortably hold indefinitely. That there would come a moment, as there always does, when concealment became its own kind of damage. He knew all of that, and he chose every single day for 10 years to keep the secret anyway. Not because he did not trust her. He trusted her completely. Not because he did not love her. He loved her in the particular way that a person loves the one thing in their life that feels entirely uncontaminated by every complicated thing they carry. He kept the secret because he was afraid. Specifically, he was afraid of the moment they were now living through. The moment when she would look at him with the document between them and ask who each really was. And he would have to reckon with the possibility that his answer might change everything. Carol listened to all of it without interrupting. She was very still. When he finished talking, she looked at him for a long moment, and then she picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, got up and poured herself a new one, and came back to the table. She asked him how much. He told her the current figure, which was by that point in early 2015, somewhere between $350 and $400 million, depending on the quarter. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "That parking garage on 5th Street. He said, "Yes." She said, "I drive past that every week." He said, "I know." She said nothing for another long moment. Then she said, Daniel, I bought this table at a garage sale. He said, I know. I was there. She said, you could have bought me a table. He said, you loved that table. She said, that is not the point. He said, I know. That is not the point. And they sat there together in the kitchen that Carol had painted the color of warm sand the previous spring, at the table she had found at a garage sale and carried home in the back of his truck, under the light fixture she had picked out at a discount store, and Daniel had installed on a Saturday afternoon while she read to him from a novel she liked. And outside the window, the February darkness was complete, and the neighborhood was quiet, and the life they had built together sat around them like a house that had just been shaken by something neither of them had seen coming, walls still standing, everything inside slightly rearranged, the familiar made suddenly and entirely strange.